You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. I preempted the lady. What can you do? Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate having you on as well. If you don't know already, it's Halloween right now. Those of you watching years from now probably never get that reference. I don't know. Maybe Halloween won't even exist. That, or maybe it'll be 365 days of the year. Anyway, guys, as always, happy Halloween if you're watching the show in the next week. If not, well, then you're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the hell I'm talking about and what kind of drugs I'm on. So have fun with that 10 years from now. As always, we've got some amazing people on the show. They're going to sharpen your minds, make you brilliant, make you smarter, make you more empathetic, make you just understand the world so well that you're going to get the Chris Voss glow aura about you. And this is trademark, people. This is something we designed a long time ago on purpose, that if you listen to the Chris Voss Show enough, you get this aura glow that becomes you and emanates off you. So much bullshit. I'm just cracking myself up. It just emanates off you, and people will see you and be like, my God, you're so amazing, sexy, intelligent. I just want to be close to you. And like, it'll be weird because you'll have to get restraining orders on all those people because you have the Chris Voss glow. And if that doesn't sound exciting enough, our gentleman we have on the show, our guest, will excite you even more. So we'll get into that. But in the meantime, share the glow. Share the glow, the Chris Voss Show glow, with your family, friends, and relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. It emanates off you. I don't know, youtube.com/Chris Voss, and Chris Voss on TikTok. I'm suffering from the glow right now. There's just too much glow going on. I think I overdosed on the glow. There's an overdosement of glow. So as always, read the lawyer's fine print at the below of every Chris Voss Show glow to make sure you don't overconsume, because that's important. You'll end up like me, an addict on the Chris Voss Show glow. We have a very wonderful gentleman on the show, and he's a doctor. Maybe he can figure out how to save me from my OD that we're having right now on the Chris Voss Show glow emanating from me. Dr. Kyle Daigle is on the show with us today. He's a go-to expert in neurological rehabilitation and childhood development, both of which I failed somewhere in my life in childhood development. But it could be because I kept overdosing on the Chris Voss Show glow. He's joining us to talk about his wares and all the different aspects that he can advise us with to improve the quality of our lives. He's a distinguished American chiropractor renowned for his profound expertise in the realms of childhood development disorders and neurological rehabilitation. There's hope for me yet, people. With a distinguished fellowship in childhood development orders, he's established himself as an influential figure in the field, sharing his wealth of knowledge through international lectures on pivotal topics such as neurological rehab, laser therapy, personal development, and innovative intersection of video games and healthcare. I'm going to ask him if he recommends what my doctors are recommending, the frontal lobotomy. As an accomplished author, he's contributed significantly to the literature of healthcare with his seminal works, Cracking the Code of Autism and What If You Knew, which is what I say to a lot of people when I see them talking about politics on social media. These insightful publications serve essential resources for professionals and family navigating the complexities of developmental challenges and changes of healthcare strategies. In addition to his academic and literary achievements, he runs a thriving private practice situated in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where he provides exemplary healthcare services with a focus on holistic well-being. Moreover, as a co-owner of the esteemed Neuro Solution Center in Atlanta, he actively contributes to the advancement of healthcare solutions on a broader scale. Welcome to the show, Dr. Kyle. How are you?
Well, man, thank you so much, Chris.
There you go. I'm suffering from a little bit of the Chris Voss Show glow. You have any recommendations for how we can come down off this?
Yeah, man, just get you some water and gargle.
Get water and gargle. Is that gargling? Is that the best thing?
Yeah, gargle, and it activates the vagus nerve, kind of soothes things, calms things down a little bit.
Now, I've lived in Vegas for 20 years, and when we activate the vagus nerve, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, well, that's more like lights and sound, man. That's more ready to party.
Yeah, it's a spirit rhino thing. Anyway, so Dr. Daigle, give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, so I have drkyledaigle.com just for my books and just some of the social media links. And then I have a private practice. It's at uperformance.com. And then Neural Solutions Center of ATL.com. And, Instagram, Dr. Kyle Daigle, YouTube, Facebook. Those are some places to kind of see some of the work we're doing.
There you go. And so tell us a little bit about your backstory. What got you interested in becoming a doctor and into this field?
Yeah, so, it all started from childhood. I was a really sick child, had chronic allergies, had a really bad speech impediment, speech delay, but I was very hyperactive, but I was pretty good at sports. And I had a brother that actually had a medical procedure and ended up getting meningitis. Mm-hmm. And I watched him 6 weeks in the hospital in ice baths just to keep his temperature down. And I remember that the doctor just walked to my family and to my dad and told my mom and dad, say, hey, look, your son's going to make it. He's going to be okay. And I watched my dad break down in tears and he hugged this doctor. Mm-hmm. And I watched that and I was just like, I want to be that guy. Wow. And so from second grade on, I wanted to be a doctor.
There you go. A lot of people say they want to be a doctor when they're young kids and stuff. Everyone asks you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're like, I don't know. A pimp, and whatever, doctor, astronaut, lawyer, all that good stuff. And but you ran with it, man. Good for you.
Never faded.
There you go. So what made you want to get into this sort of thing instead of like, I don't know, maybe doing surgeries? Do you do surgeries at all?
No, I don't do surgery. So what happened was I actually did, I was actually wanted to really actually be a pediatric oncologist, had a really strong fascination of cancer. I did research in undergrad, and that kind of gave me a little pivotal, kind of insight as to how, the medical treatments are typically done. And, I remember calling my dad and telling my dad, I'm like, hey, Dad, I'm not going to go to med school. I'm actually going to go to alternative school. And he's like, what the hell is that?
Like, I want my money back.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I think I'm going to be a chiropractor. And he's like, they're not even real doctors. And I was like, wow. No, like there's, there's a very interesting field of school I was going to that I found talked a lot about, they had a background in neurology. Mm-hmm. And I had a background in nutrition. So I was like, if I can go into nutrition and neurology. And really the craziest thing was I was taking a neuro class and they showed me this guy who was actually like trimmering. He was trimmering like crazy. And this guy puts on like some blue glasses and he stops his trimmer. And I remember asking the doctor and, the teacher, the professor, I was like, how did that happen? And he's like, whoever figures that out is going to be a rich man one day. And I was like, well, shit, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure out exactly what's going on. And that led me to really studying the eyes. And I found that the eyes actually have some very powerful aspects into the brain. Oh, wow. And that led me into developing software companies and a laser company by figuring out how to basically stimulate the brain through, various things. I use sound, I use colors, I use eye movements, and now I make video games for rehab.
Yeah. I've got a whole list of enemies here that need their brains stimulated. Can we send them over to you? Because they're dead. They're dead in the head. No, I'm just kidding. So there you go. But that's interesting that they, I would imagine so, because, when you put, blue light in front of you from your cell phone and different things, like if I can't look at my cell phone. If I get up to pee, in the middle of the night, I can't look at that cell phone. If that blue light hits my eyes for that cell phone, I'm awake. I'm like, oh, let's get up and do stuff then, I guess. But I'm, deadbeat tired. So that would make sense,
There's an interesting thing to that. And Albert Einstein is an incredible smart scientist, and he came up with this equation: E equals mc squared.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just take this concept from a very basic, and so energy equals mass, and mass of basically every cell in your body times the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is we have this thing called a circadian rhythm, which is our sleep cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And our sleep cycle is naturally designed to basically really be exposed to the sun. And so after the sun goes down, our eyes are naturally not designed to see a lot of light. I mean, we're designed to see dark or maybe like a candle or fire.
Mm-hmm.
And when you expose your eyes to basically blue light from your cell phones, even from your light switch, to a television, it can disrupt your circadian rhythm, which is your sleep cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one thing that we're seeing with a lot of people, like, myself, people that are, on screens a lot, is that, it can alter your sleep cycle because of it's distorting the way that your eyes and your circadian rhythm naturally, integrate with one another.
Yeah, it definitely will. I mean, I think more and more people are learning about blue light and circadian rhythms and stuff. We've had lots of doctors on the show that have talked about that. I even started doing a thing where when I get up and have my coffee in the morning, I go sit in the sun, get my vitamin D the natural way, and try and start that circadian rhythm. But yeah, I mean, I have a giant stupid ass screen in front of me that I sit at all day long, and it's a wonder I can sleep at all the way I use screens. So let's talk about some of the stuff that you do with your practice and how you help people. You deal in different things like traumatic brain injuries, which I have a whole list of people for you. Gut brain health, which I'm pretty familiar with. Autism. Biohacking, and childhood development disorders, which I also have a whole list of people for you to look at. Where should we start?
Well, I think that, probably to lay it off is actually, I think that everything really starts behind childhood development.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the biggest problem in our whole healthcare is when you take your child to a wellness visit, the kids aren't really being properly assessed, in my clinical opinion. Doctors are just checking height and weight. And really, as a parent, your main concern is for your kids to hit big milestones, like being able to make eye contact, roll, crawl, stand up.
Uh-huh.
And there's something called primitive reflexes, and it's actually basically how the brain builds its developmental stages. And these doctors aren't checking for this. So as a parent, you don't realize that your child could potentially have a developmental delay, although they're hitting these big milestones.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is these reflexes set really the foundation of how the brain's going to develop.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the leading causes, in my personal opinion, to people who have ADHD, dyslexia, even autism, is because what's happening is you're having abnormal activity in the brain. And the question is, well, why are you having that? And it's because the brain is not naturally developing by integrating these reflexes. And then it's wild. And that again goes back to, even when someone has a traumatic brain injury, whether it's a minor concussion or even potentially like, a pretty good, motor vehicle accident, someone, getting hit in the head, they can actually revert back to, a couple of years in their kind of cognitive aspect or their maturity. And, the way that we bring these patients back out is actually through childhood development. So it's interesting because my background in childhood development, whether it's I'm working with a young child who just come out of the NICU, or whether I'm working with someone who's like 65 who just gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's, really my assessment is the same. And the treatment really is actually also going to be the same, but it's going to be based off of, if these people or these patients have these reflexes that are present, or if they return. And that's how we help these patients, from either, 1 month old all the way up to 95 years old. We help basically, improve the brain development through assessing these childhood development primitive reflexes.
So if I understand you right, it all comes from childhood. It like you can trace a lot of this stuff back to the childhood and how they developed or how they didn't develop. And then you've developed different ways to help correct it, even though they're 95 years on.
Well, what's happening is these reflexes deal with certain parts of what's called the brainstem. So like we have these things called cranial nerves, our senses.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have 12 cranial nerves, and they situate in different parts of the brainstem. And that's where these reflexes reside. So when I look at someone, I'm looking at everything. I'm looking at their pupil size. I'm looking at their facial tone. I'm looking at their head tilts.
Huh.
I'm looking at, how they basically just interact with me. And I think that, taking a really good case history, because a lot of times, like if, for example, I work with a lot of Navy SEALs. If I get a Navy SEAL, that person typically rehabs and recovers from a brain injury a lot faster than the person who's basically playing video games and sitting very sedentary.
Yeah.
And it's because of how active the brain is. But I just take really good case history. So, my clinic's not an in and out type of clinic. I really have to kind of dig in and figure out, like, I always ask patients, like, do you know if you crawled when you were a child? And they're like, well, shit, I don't know. I was like 50 years ago. But what's happening is there's patients who have like when you look at people and they have like a deviated eye, and that person's not looking at you normal, that typically is something that could have happened as an infant, that they missed some of these reflexes, and then it translated into visual disturbances where they're literally having a deviation in their eye.
Wow.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot on the show. I mean, it seems one of the big themes seems to be on a lot of the show and authors we interviews, childhood trauma and its effect across life. But this is interesting how this sort of neurological development affects people through their whole lives as well. I had severe ADHD in my teens, and had it probably throughout most of my life. I've had to take depression meds twice in my life and I probably need them now. I'm probably, clearly I'm too high on the Chris Voss Show Glow. So there's that problem. So you developed something called, or I don't know if you developed it, but you used something called photobiomodulation and neurological rehab equipment. How does that work?
So it's based off of light. So what we do is my partner and I, Dr. Brandon Crawford, we own a company called Neurosolution. It's a laser distribution company. So we distribute red lights. Like if you see those red light panels, the actual we have a handheld laser that he and I got together and we pre-programmed settings. So what we do is we use these lasers over different parts of the body, mainly really try to really put them over arteries. So basically red light improves circulation. And so when we see someone with like a brain injury, for example, in like the left frontal lobe, we'll put a laser over their left carotid artery to get blood flow to the left frontal lobe. And then we'll do rehab, for example, like maybe on the face or on the tongue or visual or sound or vibration. And we'll basically use all this sensory stimulation to basically enhance function of the frontal lobe. And the laser just assists the enhancement of blood flow.
There you go. We've had some people who've come on the show that talked about red light and infrared light.
Right.
And I guess it's FCC approved, FDA approved, FCC approved, maybe both.
FDA approved.
There you go. And it's interesting how it works. I've used the devices on my muscles when they get locked up and stuff, and I've been really impressed with it so far. I'm just kind of really blown away by something that seems like simple technology. Thanks, Kelly. This is a fascinating conversation. Geeking out on, she says, from LinkedIn there. So we're having fun. Now, one thing you help people with, I assume you do, is in autism or diagnosing with autism. How do you work with autism folks?
So I kind of have a big comprehensive approach. So one is that, a lot of autistic kids, they have a lot of specific like motor mannerisms. So they'll like repeat things, typically don't have really good coordination, don't make good eye contact. And a lot of times these kids have like really bad digestive issues. So what I do is, I run a lot of labs. So I run stool samples to check what their gut kind of looks like. I run urinalysis. What I've actually found that's very, intriguing, what I'm kind of like, lecturing and part of my book was about, is that so far, I have 63 different countries of patients that come and see me actually in my practice. Every single child that I've tested across the entire globe has actually tested positive for mycotoxin exposure, which is mold exposure. And it's very interesting. So there's this big concept with the gut-brain connection. That I think you're very, familiar with. And I feel like they're missing something, and it's called the sinus-brain, sinus-gut-brain connection. And we're actually seeing that these kids are actually having calcification, so whiteness. Basically, they're having fungus actually in their sinuses, and it's directly impacting their frontal lobes. And then it's also impacting their brainstem, which is why a lot of these kids can't speak. So, yeah. And so what I'm able to do is basically I check the urine for, nutrients. I run something, basically a mycotoxin check for mold, run stool samples. I actually run blood to see something, it's basically a brain profile, so I can see what's going on in different parts of the brain, different chemicals, neurotransmitters.
Wow.
And then I also run what's called a QEEG. So it's like an EEG, but it's called qualitative EEG. So if I can, I'll put a skull cap on these kids, and I'm actually able to see what the electrical activity looks like. Wow. And what I do is I actually try to balance out their brainwave activity. So a lot of these kids have so you have delta waves, which are a very low wave. And so these kids that are nonverbal, what I'm finding out is the kids that in their speech centers, so something called Broca's and Wernicke's, they have a low brainwave. It's a delta wave, and you're not going to speak with a delta wave. And then they also have something called high beta waves, which is like if, a tiger was sitting in the room with us. So their brain basically rolls between these two brain waves. And these kids don't typically sleep. They react. They have, repetitive motor mannerisms. So what I do is I actually use sound therapy. So we actually use brain waves. So I basically try to calm their brainwave activity through sound. We do photobiomodulation. So we actually laser these places on different parts of the brain. And then I also check these kids for their cranial nerves. So, I tell people that our senses basically, build networks in the brain. And when you look at these kids, they typically have like a really big right pupil. And then they have like no right facial tone. So they have like this line on the left side of the face, and there's like nothing here, and they have a right head tilt. And so what's happening is from a brain perspective, if you have all these deficits on these cranial nerves, then you're going to see underactivity in the brain. And then the other side, you're going to see hyperactivity. So really what I do is very similar to like an ADHD kid. I try to balance out the brainwave activity, and then I just work on improving basically their cranial nerves. And then I do these primitive reflexes. And then I basically get them on, good nutrition, try to clean their gut up. I teach parents about what's something called trigeminal and facial nerve stimulation, stimulate the face.
Really?
And it mimics, you and I are talking, we're using our face. These kids are not verbal. So I basically use, an artificial stimulation to rehab the facial nerves to basically stimulate the brain to eventually, over time, get these kids to actually start to speak.
That's pretty wild, man. We had a pediatrician on a couple of years ago who wrote a book, and his theory was, and he said he was able to solve he claimed to be able to solve somewhat of autism. If it depended upon the severity of the case, but he found that it was directly correlated to the gut health, like what you talked about. He attributed to it causing swelling on the brain. But it sounds like you've gone to a whole different next level where you're right in the brain and all the different pieces and parts. And he was just a family practitioner, but that was something he developed. But, more and more over the years and over people we've had on the show like yourself, I mean, I've learned that, gut health is so important, which is why you shouldn't eat, some of the crap that's out there. Like stay away from Taco Bell night.
Yeah. But to answer one thing that's very interesting about, the gut, and I completely support, the gut brain connection in children with autism, even, really in anything, even multiple sclerosis,
really?
ALS, all that, the gut and the brain. And then there's this interesting nerve called the vagus nerve, which you probably have maybe heard of this in your talks, but the vagus nerve is a nerve that comes from the brainstem, and that's actually what innervates your gut. It would basically helps your gut, absorb nutrients, get rid of inflammation. It helps your body detoxify. And we're seeing in all these children that their vagus nerve is extremely weak. So these kids aren't really absorbing nutrients, and then their body can't detoxify. So if they are eating, high carbohydrate diets and all these processed foods and all these toxins, they can't get it out of their system. And then you start seeing this gut brain connection. So all this inflammation, stress in the gut is now inflaming in the brain. And then boom, now you're having a child that, maybe one day he's good and 3 or 4 days he's having bad days. And, but I think that the missing link is also too, is that we're neglecting the sinus, brain, sinus, gut. Because if you just clean the gut up and you neglect the sinuses, well, then, you go to sleep at night, you get a postnasal drip, and then boom, it repopulates into the gut. And I've seen this with parents. They're like,
Serious?
look,
Wow.
I tried all these diets. It's not working for my kid. And they're like, look, I can show you, this is the supplements. I'm going to have people that come in there on like 50 different supplements. And I'm like, whoa, that's way too much for your kid. And so then I basically run this mycotoxin panel, and their mold levels are through the roof.
Really?
And they're like, where the hell's this stuff coming from? And I'm like, well, look, there's a lot of things. Because these kids have poor facial tone, when they do get exposed to mold, whether it's in a home, whether it's in school, whether it's in churches, it can be just in the environment, the nerve is actually really weak to the sinuses, so it can't clear it out. And then if you smell something, you can get a memory of, grandma cooking something for Thanksgiving, 10 years ago. So anything in the nose can make its way into the brain. And this is what they're seeing in Alzheimer's. You can actually, it's called the peanut butter test. This is crazy that they're showing that you can detect Alzheimer's disease typically, 5+ years by actually literally having a difference in the way you smell between your left nostril and your right. I think it's like 7 centimeters is actually the research.
Really?
Yeah, they're showing that we're getting basically beta amyloid plaques in the brain, and they're showing new research that it's actually coming from, basically, it's called nasal dysbiosis. So abnormal bacteria in your sinuses that's directly impacting the actual brain.
Wow.
And we're seeing some kids.
I got to go take the test after the show.
It's crazy.
How to do a peanut butter test to test.
So basically it's like this. This is how it goes. So you take basically peanut butter, and you close your eyes, and then you just like, the natural thing is someone has like a roller underneath your nose, and you just try to see when you can smell, and then you switch the other nostril, and you'll notice that you can see this big difference. Like you might smell here, and then the other side nose might smell way down here. And that's actually an abnormal function, because you should be able to smell, basically symmetrical. So if it's basically 7 centimeters, I believe is the research, then, there's a potential that there's maybe a risk for Alzheimer's, and someone should get, checked for, plaquing.
Maybe someone should check that peanut butter. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I know, but what's happening to these kids, back to that, because I'm ADD myself, but these kids are eating high carbohydrate diets, and they're showing that a lot of these grains could potentially, harness mold. Basically mold spores. And so if they can't get it out, then boom, it's either the sinuses or the gut that actually impacts receptors in the brain.
There we go. I think Kelly's having the Chris Voss Show glow a little too much now. She's freaking out over all this stuff. So there you go. This is really insightful. So how do you work with people in the audience that maybe suspect that their kids maybe are having issues, or maybe their kids have autism? I have friends who have autistic kids. And they put in a lot of work, and it's challenging. So how do people reach out to you if they can work with you and need help and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, the first thing, so my book that's actually, so it just got published, is coming. It should be on the market next week, actually. But that right there is like 17 chapters. I think I wrote like 406 pages. I cover like everything, A to Z of just everything I've seen personally, clinically. So there's a lot of education in that. I do consultations where, I typically do 2 consults a day virtually, just because I have a pretty busy practice. So people typically can reach out to my practice. I have a lot of intake forms that they have to fill out, so I can kind of get a good idea. And then, we do lab assessments on these patients. So I do work virtually. But then really what really kind of makes the big difference is I have what's called an intensive rehab practice. So families typically bring their kids to see me, or even, people with brain injuries. And I'll work with these kids anywhere from 2 weeks up to like 6 weeks. And we're actually doing over 20 hours a week, typically on an average for rehab. Then I send them what's called a home care program. So these are exercises and stimulation that they need to do on a consistent basis. And then there's follow-ups. That's typically how I work with children. And then, I do online coaching every month, where I just get parents. My whole goal is, I'm a child who had speech issues, so I want every kid to find their voice.
Oh, wow.
So I educate parents, and then I use my social media to just constantly keep pumping, videos and different educational content to hopefully, Because there's a lot of parents, as parents, friends. It's just frustrating, man, because you don't really know where to navigate, and it's just like the parents just kind of get pawned off. Where your kid has autism, just deal with it, and deep down inside, these parents know there's something out there. And, I just hope to be at least some sort of insight to let them know that, there are things out there outside of just taking medication that you can do. But it's not an easy journey, and it's not for everyone. And that's where, it is a tough world.
And that's wonderful that you do that. I've seen my friends navigate their autistic children. Is there any way I can get an affiliate code for people that refer to you have that brain damage? Because I have a lot of people I come in contact with every day, especially on social media, that brain damage. So I could probably make you a lot of money. No, I'm just kidding. You mentioned, I think you mentioned multiple sclerosis. My sister got multiple sclerosis, and it's always it's always had to be my interest. And it was always interesting to me with multiple sclerosis. I don't know if these facts are true, but to the best of my knowledge, they are. But multiple sclerosis usually strikes people in colder, northern parts of the U.S. And also it strikes them. It seems to strike women more than men. And I'm wondering, is there more mold growth? Maybe this is attributable to mold in so many ways that we don't even understand.
I've seen a lot of MS cases, and I've just found, there's the gut-brain connection. So when you run stool samples on these patients, they have a lot of inflammation, typically pathogens, which means there's some sort of infection. I have yet to see a patient with MS not test positive for mycotoxin mold exposure.
Seriously?
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's wild. And I just recently had a really cool case we just put up on social media of a girl. She was a young basically former college dancer, and she was, really good shape. And all of a sudden, she wakes up one day and she her vision gets distorted, and her eyes deviate in.
Yeah.
And we were able to, over 4 or 5 months, actually able to successfully be able to, reduce basically her inflammatory conditions. And they actually uplifted her diagnosis of MS, which was amazing.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. But, it goes down to I feel like, when someone navigates the healthcare system, you get this diagnosis, and, I'm very big into personal development. So I tell my patients, if you get a diagnosis, you have a choice to basically accept it or rebuke it. And my personal opinion is to rebuke everything and basically really tap into, basically the mind-body connection. And then it's to find out what's going on. So if you have this diagnosis, that's just this big label. Let's find out what's underneath, and let's start cherry picking all these stress responses, whether it's changing up your diet, maybe taking vitamins. Maybe it's changing your environment. Like, for example, mold could potentially be in someone's house. I'll tell you something very wild that is very, very mind-blowing. Is I had a patient one time get sick actually from mold exposure, and it was actually brand new home. They were like, "You're full of shit. There's no way I have mold." And I'm like, no. And coming to find out, they did an ERMI test, and they tested the bed sheets. And what happened is they had a high level of mold spores on their bed sheets. And that's where this person couldn't get out of bed. And it came from the front-loading washing machine.
What the hell? So it wasn't the house, it was the washing machine. I didn't even know you could do that.
And if you look at a front-loading washing machine, you look at that rubber gasket, you'll see a lot of mold in the back of that.
Holy
then
crap.
Mold doesn't die in heat. So you basically put your clothes and all that, get it all circulated with mold.
And then you're wearing it. And
exactly right. And you're sleeping on it, breathing it in, your towels, your wash rags. So you're just basically breathing in, and then boom, it can start impacting the actual brain.
Holy crap-a-moly. I never would have even thought of that, man. So do you find that, it seems like mold seems to be a theme here. Is that pretty correct? And so
I think from my clinical experience that, I'm even seeing mold in the desert. So I work with patients in Saudi Arabia. I work with patients in the UAE, and I'm getting patients over there who actually, as we detox them from mold exposure, that they start their children start doing better. People with MS start being able to go from a wheelchair to start standing up. And mold, in my opinion, is it's the number one pretty much priority outside of parasitic infections as like a pathogen response for the immune system. My opinion.
Wow, that is wild, man. You mean want to do one of those what are they, the termite things where they put up a big tent and just demol my whole house? Is that possible? I don't think it is it?
I don't know.
How do you test for mold?
So basically what they do is they can do air quality control where they can actually do like air samples. My favorite test is called an ERMI test, where it's like a glove. They go and you kind of swipe, swab, and then put it and send it off. And it'll kind of give you a good idea as to if your house is basically inhabitable. Which, I mean, it's, I live in the South. I live in Louisiana, which is very moldy. Yeah, it's very interesting. But yeah, so there's that. But mold, mold grows in very common places like your bathrooms, your windowsills, washing machines, dishwashers, ice maker machines, air vents. And then again, people who have like kind of high humidity places. And again, when it snows, it's very interesting because you get all this water and it can actually get between the shingles and then seep in. And people who have foam insulated roofs potentially could have a leak and they don't realize, and it's basically rolling throughout the whole house. But yeah, mold is scary from a neurological perspective.
I just Googled something and there's a mold and mildew air purifier.
Yes.
I don't know. Yeah.
I got them in every room. My clinic has them. My home has it.
Really?
I'm like, I mean, look, I'd tell you this. I see patients with seizure activity. So epilepsy, that's another big thing. If no one knows why someone has, epilepsy, I always tell them run a stool sample, run a mycotoxin panel. And then basically as you start to, clean the gut and the sinuses up, now you're removing that stress response to the brain from either the gut or the sinus to the brain.
Mold and mildew air purifier. One thing I've always had trouble with is, ever since I was about 45, 47 is, during the winters, we have to keep a humidifier and run it pretty heavy during the winter. And sometimes I wonder if any mold or mildew builds up with the thing. That's pretty wild. So I mean,
CPAP machines too, man. I've seen CPAP machines. People get sick from the CPAP machine from not cleaning it. The dehumidifiers from.
Serious?
I'm serious, man.
Wow! Holy shit! You're making me want to go out and buy one of these mold and mildew air purifiers for my house now. That is crazy. So now I've got your book up here. You're from 2017. You've got a new book coming out. Is it going to be on Amazon?
Be on Amazon, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble.
Okay. What's the name of it?
Cracking the Code of Autism.
Okay.
I made this book because at first it was going to be Outspeaking Autism, but I had a really good friend of mine, a writer. He told me, he said, Kyle, you know what? You're going to have to cause controversy. He said, so if I saw Cracking the Code or I saw Outspeaking, he said, I would buy Cracking the Code. And I know it's a sensitive subject to some families, but when they read it, they'll see that it's out of pure kindness in my heart that I wrote this just to really, the title is just to attract people. And then inside of it is just very supportive of what I've seen clinically. Because I've helped a lot of kids around the world speak and, train other doctors and kids to speak. And so the goal is to hopefully one day help a parent find their child's hidden voice.
How soon do you expect it to be up on Amazon?
So it's done. So next week it's going to be released.
Okay, cool. And you should get us a cover. We'll put it in the show video here, so that people can have it if you have a cover picture. But this is really insightful. Holy crap! I mean, you turned me on to a whole new paranoid obsession about mold and in the air. But I've been concerned about it because, last winter, the humidifier was running so heavy. It actually started, the doors wouldn't close. And we were like, okay, well, we should probably dial this thing back. And so we did. But I was like, I wonder if we're going to get mold growing in the house. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, man. Jesus, wow.
I got sick a couple of years ago from actually this, but, I work a lot in Europe. So I'm back and forth. And in Europe, it's like a really massive problem over there because if you have all those old ass buildings and, it takes you typically 2 weeks to actually kind of recover when I go to like London, or now I'm actually working in Croatia. And yeah, it's just being, I bring in, my wife makes fun of me all the time because I have like a little, like my little baggie of like supplements and stuff that I take. And I always bring a little small portable air purifier just because I'm in and out of hotels and, carpets. So people are wet taking showers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
That is crazy, man. That is crazy. Well, we've learned a lot of stuff. And I'm just gonna start drinking bleach. Don't do that, people. That's just a joke. Don't do that. I guess hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, white vinegar, borax. I think there's some people taking that for COVID. Don't do that, folks. But yeah, this is really, now you got me all paranoid about mold. I'm gonna have mold nightmares now, Doc. But this is good data. This is good information, and people should pick up your book. Give us the title of the book one more time. Your .coms we got, so people can find you on the interwebs.
So, Cracking the Code of Autism is my new book being published. I have another book. It was called What If You Knew? Basically just over just basic, small, common things that people don't really know about. Private practice is uperformance.com, neurosolutionlc.com, neurosolutionatx.com. And I have another company. It's called neuro-solution.com. That's my laser company. And then I have my video game company called neurosage.com.
There you go. And my mom suffers from asthma. I wonder if that has something to do with mold and development. Seriously?
She's got mold.
Holy crap. And she has a CPAP machine too. So there you go. All right, well, we're going to look into that. Maybe we'll get her one of these mold and mildew things for Christmas. There you go. So this has been really insightful. This has been really insightful, Kyle. And thanks for the nightmares. But no, I mean, this is stuff that's really important. And then it's great for autism kids. And yeah, if you can heal this stuff up, that would be awesome as well. Well, thank you very much, Doctor. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Chris.
There you go. And thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, and all those crazy places on the internet. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.